Well, the results are out, so join me as I review and rank the books I read for the Booktube Prize Final for translated fiction. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books, and the eagle-eyed among you will notice that I'm sitting in a very different place. I'm in the middle of moving about 4 different rooms around in my house, and this room will be my hobby space, and where I've got all my sewing stuff and books. I'm surrounded by books, and this isn't all of them, so the place looks a bit of a mess. But I've got nowhere else to film, so bear with me. I've also lost one of my lights, so if you think my videos normally look like amateur hour, I don't know what to tell you. The results of the Booktube Prize went final at midnight last night for those of us in the UK. So I am going to review and rank the books that I read for the translated fiction final and see how they match up to where these books ended up in the official vote. So the books that I rated in the third lowest rankings were the same as those that came the third lowest in the final. So none of these books made it to the prize winners podium. In 6th place, I had How to Order the Universe by Maria Jose Ferada. This opens as M, a 7-year-old child in Pinochet regime Chile, frequently skips school to join her father on his trips for his job as a travelling salesman of tools and basic homewares. She's a child in an adult world and she learns the tricks of the trade. She spends time with other salesmen in smoky cafes and hotels, but often her understanding of things is tinged with her naivety of being 7 years old. Set against the political backdrop of the time though, not even a child is immune to reality coming into sharp focus. As Em grows up, her once close relationship with her dad grows strained, and she's able to look on him and his life and the time she spent traveling with him with fresh eyes. This is a strange book. I felt a bit uncomfortable at seeing the world that Em inhabited and her father's justification for it as this kind of parallel education. But at the same time, there was something quite charming about her way of seeing that world and in how she felt secure and confident in her role as her father's sidekick. In the latter part of the book, as Em returns to see her father when she is a young adult, and we understand how the political climate has changed the world of travelling salesmen that he once thrived in, it is really heartbreaking. This book is short, but it doesn't ever feel small. The loss of innocence, the impact of a dictatorship, and this unique father-daughter relationship are all quite meaty topics. And to pack them into such a tight narrative is really quite impressive. It does mean that much is left unsaid and left to the reader to infer, and I'm not sure that I always did. I think that kind of lessened the impact of the story for me, which left me a little bit frustrated because I knew there was something that I was missing. My 5th book was The Phone Box at the Edge of the World by Laura Imai Messina. And this is about, in this remote location, there's a beautiful garden, and in that garden there is a phone box. The phone isn't connected, but when grieving people lift the receiver, they're able to speak to those that they miss. And so when radio presenter Yui hears about this phone box from a caller into her show, she decides that she's going to visit it because she's navigating life, having lost both her very young daughter and her mother in the 2011 tsunami. And she finds solace in this garden. And there she meets others who are mourning those that are missing from their lives, most notably Takeshi, who's been left as a single father after the death of his wife. The two strike up a friendship as they regularly make the long journey to the phone box together, and the other regulars of the garden and the caretaker of the garden, it all kind of becomes this community bonded by their connection to the place. I've said many times that I often find the emotions in Japanese works a little bit too polite to connect fully to. So I was quite surprised that Messina herself is not a Japanese writer, because I actually did find a touch of that in this book. I did think that the beautiful way that grief and loss are dealt with in this story felt a bit more emotionally available, but there was still that bit of distance that I've talked about before that I find with Japanese literature. So I don't know if that's a stylistic choice, given that, this book is set in Japan and focuses on Japanese people, and I think the author lived there for a while as well, or it's simply a coincidence. But there are really, there's many poignant insights woven into this story, and I think it was those insights that I liked the most. The story of Yui and Takeshi, it's a sweet story of their friendship and them finding this path towards healing together. It's a good conduit for those insights, but I did feel that in that storyline, like, Yui's grief becomes secondary to that of Takeshi and his daughter, and that made me a little bit sad for Yui. But it's a sweet and touching book, and all the more so because the phone box actually exists, and the stories of all of the characters are very much rooted in reality. But in some ways, that sweetness is a bit of a hindrance, because, grief is also ugly, and it's angry, and it's painful. And I didn't feel that those aspects were touched on enough to make this feel like a rounded portrait of that particular human experience. My fourth place went to Disquiet by Zulfu, I think that's how you pronounce it, Livaneli. And this is about Ibrahim. He is a reporter who is working in Istanbul when he hears of the death of his childhood friend Hussein. Hussein was killed in Germany by neo-Nazis, and Ibrahim returns to their hometown, which is on the Turkish-Syrian border, and he learns the story of Hussein's final months. His family had encouraged him to flee to Germany to escape members of ISIS who had attempted to kill him, because it was discovered that he had fallen in love with this woman, and whilst he was a Muslim man and he was also already engaged to a Muslim woman, he'd fallen in love with a Yazidi woman called Meliknaz, I think, who was in a refugee camp that he was working in. And Ibrahim tries to understand Hussein's connection to this woman, and in turn kind of becomes a bit obsessed with her himself. And I thought this was a fantastic book for, like a reader like me, who I don't know a lot about that part of the world. I don't know a lot about the Yazidi people, but I love to learn those sorts of things through stories. And I felt fully immersed in the setting. And I thought that for such a short book, again, it packed a lot in. In his desire to understand what's happened to his friend, Ibrahim speaks to loads of different people, and so there's a really rich pool of opinions and details that are given through those conversations. I did find it a little bit strange that Ibrahim becomes so focused on Meliknaz rather than what the situation says about how the Yazidi people are treated. But I wonder if that was the author's way of kind of highlighting the problems that are inherent in how we treat refugees. They only become a concern when there is a personal, and by that I mean either on an individual level or, on a bigger political level, that advantage or interest that's connected to caring about refugees. And I think that's what is meant when it's kind of echoed in Hussein's, I think it's his last words, where he says, "I was a human." Because, don't we all deserve to be treated as such, whether we're refugees or not, whether we have, someone is personally interested in us or not. So it gave me a lot to think about. So that means that my top 3 books all came in the top 3 final results as well, which is a bit of a win for me, but were they in the same order? So third place in the official results was Brickmakers by Selva Almada. And I think I rooted for this one from the very start because I was interested in the premise of this book. It's 2 young men lie dying in this empty, like a fairground, following a knife fight. And both are visited by memories and apparitions of their fathers as their final moments ebb away. This book, again, is not very long, but it delves into so much more than, what the premise gives away. It's a story not only about father and son relationships, but also about masculinity, sexuality, poverty in a rural Argentinian, I think it's Argentina, a rural Argentinian town. There's a commentary on the impact of fathers on sons and the traps that can lie in following in their footsteps. And I really enjoyed this. I was captivated the whole way through. I think it's really stunningly written, and the foreshadowing of having the two young men lying dying really makes the whole experience harrowing to read, because we know where it leads. This book is filled with violence and anger, but it also makes a powerful statement on that, the toxic idea of masculinity and how that places men in a stranglehold where violence and anger is often the only means of escape or survival. This book has stayed with me long after I read it. I really definitely want to read more of Almada's work in the future. So officially it came third, but for me this was second place, and it was a really close run thing actually between my first and second place. And talking about it now, maybe if I voted today it would be first, but officially it only came third. In second place was, let me just release it from this very precarious bubble beside me, was The Art of Losing by Alice Zeniter. I have no idea what's happened with the cover here. I cannot get it to sit back. It's a library book. This is the story of Naima and her family. She's the daughter of an Algerian refugee who had to leave Algeria during the uprising for independence against colonial France. And Naima was born and lived in France her whole life. Her grandfather had to flee with the family after being branded a Harki, which is an Algerian who was on the side of France, or at least perceived to be on the side of France. And so her father spent much of his childhood in refugee camps in France and settlements, trying to find a way to belong and survive in a country that really didn't want him and his family. So it covers those three generations, and we learn the story of the family and follow as Naima returns to Algeria, which is a country that she's rooted in by history but feels like a stranger. And I love a family saga. I love the exploration of what it means to belong. I'm really interested in the impact of colonialism, and I enjoy learning about countries, cultures that I don't have a lot of understanding of. The fact that this story is compellingly told and written in a way which really evokes a strong sense of place just made this a really enjoyable read. This is not only a story of Naima's family, but a story of those who are under colonial rule and how they're often caught between a rock and a hard place when it comes to loyalties and doing the best for their family. It also shows the difficulty of fleeing that colonial country, only to realise that this kind of motherland narrative that's fed to the colonised people is far from the truth when they land in that coloniser country. Feeling of a place but not is something that all the characters battle with, and it's really interesting to look at the importance placed on roots or what it means to be from somewhere. This is a dense book. You can see between the mess I've made of the covers. It's not always easy to read either, but I do think the payoff is worth it, and I just thought it was really good. As I said, my first and second place were really close. Officially this came second, but for me, I put this in first place, which means that my third place book actually won the translated fiction category overall, and that was The Anomaly by Herve Tellier. And this is about passengers who are on a flight to New York, and they experience this harrowing situation when their plane struggles through this unexpected flash storm. It's really intense. And on board are a mix of individuals. Off the top of my head, there's like a lawyer, a writer, a rapper, there's children, there's even an assassin. And they, you know, they all have their own lives, they all have their own things going on, but it becomes apparent that they're not the only ones, because somehow all of these passengers end up duplicated. Initially, the US government tried to contain this phenomenon, but truth has a way of getting out. And then it goes into, you know, how will the world react to these duplicate cloned people, this anomaly that's happened. I thought the story was really interesting. It does get confusing in points. So each chapter focuses on a different traveller, and we follow the stories of certain individuals both before and after their reality splits, I suppose. Some of the characters I found more interesting than others, but I liked this approach because we get a true sense of the impact of this phenomenon. As the book attempts to explain the glitch in the fabric of space and time, I got a bit lost. Physics is not my forte. I was able to kind of glide over those sections though without losing anything from the story. So don't worry if you are scientifically challenged like me, because this book is the sort of sci-fi that I can enjoy. Like, I don't know, like scientific realism. It's rooted in the familiar, so it's kind of eerily plausible. The characters are, you know, they're rooted in really human situations and emotions. You know, there's mental ill health, untenable relationships, fears of oppression, and just the daily grind. And I thought the writing was quite spare, but I wasn't too put off by that, because I think if it had been any more elaborate, then, you know, the kind of, was it swirly whirly timey-wimey parts would have lost me completely. So for my taste, I thought this is a well-balanced book that was actually really enjoyable to read. Like I said, this didn't come first place for me. I put it as third, but this is the book that came first overall for the translated fiction category of the Booktube Prize 2022. And I definitely do recommend it. I just thought the others were better. I was going to reflect on my Booktube Prize experience here, but I'm really short of time. So what I might do is a separate video where I talk about all of the books that I've read for the Booktube Prize this year, reflect on my experience as a whole, maybe do like a ranking of all of the books I read across all the categories, and talk about what my plans will be for the Booktube Prize next year. So if that's something you'd be interested, let me know in a comment below and I will get that filmed. And hopefully this room will look a bit nicer when I next film as well. Like I said, it's a massive undertaking. I'm overhauling quite a few rooms in my house. This one isn't necessarily the priority, but I'm hoping to have a nice setup with all my books at some point in the very near future. Did you take part in the Booktube Prize? Let me know how your experience has been. What did you think of the finalists in your category? Did the final result align with what you thought? And if you didn't take part in the Booktube Prize, let me know if any of these books sound interesting or if you've read any of them. I'd love to have a little bookish chat about them. And so until next time, bye!